Jim's passing, we've had numerous phone calls and messages, and there's a few letters that we received through email that I thought I would read a couple before I go through the eulogy. So, one's from Karen and Alan McLean. Our sympathies are extended to Don, Doris, Jim's siblings, John, Jerry, Don, and their families. We may be far away in PEI, but you're in our hearts and our prayers. Jim is now in Paul McGunn's head, and he'll take very good care of him, cherish your memories, and celebrate his life. Warm hugs, lots of love from Karen Mackey McLean and Alan McLean from Summerside. And then Rick and Bev Collins, sorry for your loss. We'll be thinking about all of you. You're a close family and have each other. Bring up all the good memories. From Julie Smith, Julie Eckert, I guess now. Uncle Don, Doris, Jerry, Don, John. I'm so sorry for your loss. My thoughts with all of you. Take care and love, Julie. Lori Blackbear said, so sorry to hear about Jim. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family. And then Daniel Greiner isn't able to be here as well. He sent a letter that's long ago waited. To family and friends gathered today to remember and honor the life of Jim Greiner. I'm very sorry and unable to be here with you today. So I want to share a few thoughts that may extend some comfort from a distance. To me, Jim was my Uncle Jim, my father's oldest brother. I think it's possible my view of Jim was the very best. He always worked very hard to protect us nieces and nephews from any elements of his life that were negative or potentially harmful. So the side of Uncle Jim I saw most often was the playful, sometimes goofy, caring side of him. Even though when I knew he was struggling, he still protected me from that. I remember fondly receiving letters from him and then visiting him in Vernon. I especially remember camping with him and the fearless and wild way he would drive the quad. Helmets were never optional when you rode with Jim. Just hold on tight and pray. I also fondly remember how he and I camped out for Gospel Jamboree in Entwistle. He was very excited about the weekend full of music, and we brought a bunch of food and pitched a tent. After the first night of music, we realized the music was terrible. Our rides weren't coming until Sunday afternoon, so we just camped. It was a beautiful setting by the Pamela River. The weather was perfect, and the music was much more enjoyable from a distance. So with these joyful memories, I wanted to bring a perspective from someone who saw Jim as his best. I got to see the fun, crazy, wild Uncle Jim. I got to hear him play old country songs on guitar. With a smirk on his face and twinkle in his eye, he's saying, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble. Perfectly measured way." I know he's a man who struggled and fought through life, but now that fight has come to a peaceful close. The weights and troubles that caused him so much grief are now gone. And for the first time in 30, 40, or maybe 50 years, he's finally free. And so to you, family, friends of Uncle Jim, I want to extend comfort with his image of Jim. To Grandpa and Grandma Greiner, to my dad, John, to Jerry and Auntie Dawn, and all the rest of you who cared about Jim. I urge you to keep this image of Jim in your hearts. An image of a man who finally, at last, is struggling no more. Be blessed, Daniel. I asked around lots of people different questions. I've never had to write a eulogy before, so I hope it's politically correct enough. Jim was born as James Clarence Greiner, May 2nd, 1957, at Royal Alexandra Hospital in Edmonton. He was given his grandfather's first name, James, from James Tarbuck, and his father's middle name, Clarence. He is the eldest of three brothers, Jim and John, me, and one baby sister, Dawn, or Dawn Michelle, as he would call her. As his youngest brother, I don't have memories of his young years, because I wasn't around until he was 9 years old. John's really 1 year younger, and the two of them were close in age. They're also close in mischief when they were younger, it seems. Jim's childhood was spent in Drayton Valley. One day after school, they would be babysat by Mrs. Sieben. They would walk to her place after school. Instead of going to her place like they were supposed to, though, they went home, climbed up the antenna, got onto the rooftop, and played on the rooftop. And then they heard Mrs. Stephen coming, looking for him. Jimmy, Johnny, Jimmy, Johnny. And they heard her coming and hit on the opposite, just over the roof, peeked over and kept hitting from view. She never did find him. Another time when he was bad, he needed a spanking. And Dad grabbed the board to paddle him, except the board stuck. It appears there's a nail in the board that nobody noticed. That's a real spanking. Sometimes it seems that Mom wanted twins. Although the brothers were basically a year apart, they were raised like twins. If you look at all the pictures of them, you'll notice till they're about 15 years old, they're dressed pretty much identical. It's sometimes Grandma Tarbuck would make them almost matching clothes, like one had a green shirt, the other had a green pair of pants that matched, so they would be just about matching. And in lots of the pictures I see, they were exactly matching. As a child, Jim was also close to Donald and Paul Johnson. They were next door neighbors when we were young, and Donald was only 4 days younger than Jim, so they often did a lot of stuff together. Jim really wanted to play the electric guitar when he was young. One day, Dad bought a guitar and an amp for about $15, and Dad brought it home. Well, the two brothers, Jim and John, would often play like boxing. They'd take towels, wrap up, make boxing gloves out of towels. So the night that they brought home the guitar, they thought they'd have a boxing match. And so they did that, had a boxing match. I think John won. Jim fell over, landed on the guitar, and broke the neck. So that was the first day the guitar got home. When he was in junior high, he went camping with his friends by the Pembina River, or by the Saskatchewan River, just down by where the water plant is now, just past the graveyard. They would camp out there. And remember how he explained to me how to live from bulrushes? The fluff on the top, like in that ground, you break it, it makes that fluff. You can mix it, and you mix it with water, it makes like a pancake batter, and you fry it. And it cooks like a pancake, it looks like a pancake, and it tastes like gross. But you can survive. The stem of it is sort of like a celery. You can eat like celery, a little bit better. And the bottom root is like a potato, but actually you could live off of it if you had to. It's definitely better than the pancakey stuff. When they were out camping there, they found this dead garter snake. And seeing how they were really close to the graveyard, they went up and put it over the gate of the graveyard. Luckily, it got found before some grieving widow had a heart attack coming. Let's see, Jim was a great salesman from the time he was young. Jim and John worked together. They made these little wooden crosses that they would sell out of wooden matchsticks, and they put them together. And before long, John would make the crosses, and Jim would sell them. And it worked out really good. Jim thought, this is great. I don't have to make anything. All I got to do is go and sell them. And John thought that this is great. It's easy. I don't have to do anything. Just make them. I don't have to go out and sell. So it was a good partnership. It's probably the first of many partnerships that Jim had in his life. I remember going hunting as a family when we were young. We'd all go together, and depending on the season, we'd go for rabbits or sometimes rough grouse. And the youngest would get the first shot, and then the older, and then older, until it got to Dad. None of us ever got a second shot, but sometimes I'd miss and John would miss and Jim would get a shot. But never anyone got a second shot because Dad never missed. So one time Jim and I were out hunting rabbits, and we came upon, it was like a jackpot of rabbits. We would go shoot one, and each time we'd shoot one and go over to pick it up, we'd scare up another one, and shoot it, and go to it, and scare up another one. And we did that. We got more than 20 rabbits in just over an hour. And it was a really good rabbit hunting day. That was just me and Jim. When Jim was in high school, Dad got a transfer to Devon, so they moved to Devon. When they were in Devon, Jim is one of the reasons that I don't smoke. I suppose John is in this too. They were in high school, I think it was grade 12, might have been grade 11. They were sitting at the ski hill in the ski chalet, around the picnic table in the ski chalet. And they're typical high school kids, they're all being cool, so they got one cigarette and they're smoking and pass to the next and pass to the next and going around the table. Some of them would even blow smoke rings. And then one of their friends asked, if I smoked. I was in grade 4, so of course I said yes. I thought I'd show them how mature I was. And so I was going to blow more smoke rings than anybody else. That was my plan. So I inhaled as much as I could. And I started coughing and gagging and rolling on the floor in pain for about a half hour. And everybody was just laughing and nobody would do anything. And I didn't have a dime. That's like before cell phones. And so you need an actual dime to put in the payphone. And I didn't have a dime to call for a ride. So I tried phoning 911 and they just laughed. I don't know. No one would send an ambulance for me or anything. But at least I don't smoke because of that. Jim did finally master the guitar. In high school, they'd play at the senior center in Devon for the senior citizens. We had like a family. We went there how often? Monthly, probably. I don't know, quite often. And John would play the accordion, Jim would be on the guitar, and me and Don would be the singers. He played guitar in church lots. I remember some nights when he played in church, he seemed to have more at nights. But if you played in church and you played, and then you left it sitting there, halfway through the sermon, a radio station would sort of pick up through the guitar and start to fade in and fade out through the amp. So it was weird and freaky, but it happened more than once. I remember that. He became a master guitarist over the time. For several years, he taught guitar. There was one time there was a major band called Streetheart, and the lead guitarist was sick, and he filled in for him, Rexall Center. So that was a great highlight, I'm sure. In Devon, John had a car that Jim often drove. I remember he had to pay rent. Maybe it was 10 cents a mile that he had to pay, something like that. I don't remember the amount, but I was young, I know he had to pay, because if I wanted to ride, I had to pay the fee. So one day, John needed to go to work, and Jim wanted a car, so Jim and a whole carload of friends were in, and they had to drop John off at work. Well, in the back seat, this is redneck Devon. The back seat, of course, there's a gun laying there. Well, with 4 extra people, there's no room for the gun. So Jim sat in the middle of the back seat and held the gun, sitting on the seat, holding the gun. And the constable did there checking the teenagers and pulled them over and looked at them, and they couldn't find anything. Then he's walking away, he noticed Jim's holding a gun up in the middle of the back seat. The constable said, "What's that gun for?" Jim said, "Shooting cops." What's that? He's like, shooting rabbits. So there's one time he parked the car on the side of the highway, and who knows why, but a semi smashed into it and made it a lot more contact than it was before. He told John, "I might have smashed up your car." Then the broken car that was parted out and sold for more money in pieces than we ever paid for it in the first place. I remember it was in the driveway for a long time, getting piece by piece gone. That might have been more sales training for him, who knows. He worked the summers at a farm in Drayton Valley. He worked on and off at Cornelson's. He spent 2 summers here, I think, for Topsteads and Martins, if I remember right. Is that where he was? I think that's where it was. I was little and I was going to memory and I forgot to ask anyone else. But he worked there. Then they were building with Jim and John, both working on the Banks Feeds granary. It was a granary that's supposed to be 60 feet tall, and they built the granary by taking 2x4s and laying them flat and nailing one on top of the other all the way around, and you just go up and up and up and up. When they got to about 50 feet up, the owner wanted them to hang a sign, but he didn't want it that high, he only wanted it about 40 feet. So they didn't have any ladders that would be 35 feet up, so they came up with a scheme where they would tie ropes to the sign and lower it to the right height. So that sort of worked good. And then they tied a lasso around Jim and lowered him down with a hammer and nails to nail the sign on. Well, it started good, but then they started laughing and they couldn't hold the ropes and started slipping. So they just tied the rope around one of the logs and nailed it so it wouldn't slip anymore. And then they were laughing too hard, they couldn't pull them up. The only thing we were going to get him is we stopped laughing. So they left him there and went for coffee. When it was all done, they got him down. Another time in Devon, Dad bought a new boat. It was a nice fiberglass rowboat, but the two brothers were going to go on their first boat trip, and they'd never done this before, but it was our first boat, at least our first one there. And so they're going to go down to North Saskatchewan. They started out in the evening, and it took longer than they thought to get there. And by the time they were on the river, it got dark on them. And they're on the river, and of course, Mom and Dad are frantic. The police were called. It's like, our kids are lost. They went out, they're probably drowned. So they called the RCMP. When they were on the river, it seems they heard the rapids ahead, and there's like these raging rapids. It got really dark, and they couldn't see, and they could hear these huge rapids, and they didn't want to drown, so they pulled the boat high up on the shore so no one would steal it and find it. And then they went walking till they found a house. The first house they found was a bachelor. He came to the door with a coal oil lantern, and he's got no phone, he's got no electricity. And but he says the neighbor down the road has a phone, so they pointed him which way to go, and they walked over to the neighbor's house. When they knocked on the door, this is pretty late at night, and these guys looked pretty dirty, they were all muddy, and they knocked on the door, and the door opened, and out come a shotgun. And the man of the house did not want to let them in to use the phone, but he did give them a ride home. Once they got home, of course, then my parents phoned the police, and the police had to come and check that they really did come home, so the police had to come in and make sure that, that was them in their beds. So, and then, funny thing is, when they made that trip again in the light, they got to these rapids, they found that these rapids were so shallow, you had to lift the boat and carry it through them. So, it wouldn't have been much, but at night, on a rainy, dark night, it sounded really bad. When visiting a friend's farm by Airdrie, Jim and John were there, and there was two others or so. They got the idea that let's see if we can lasso the bull and hold the rope. There's this year-old bull they were going to lasso. So they got the bull running around in the corral in circles, and John lassoed it, and Jim and a couple others are holding on to the end of the rope until the rope got tight. And then they let go, and the bull went through the corral, and through the fence, and through the pasture, and all of the other cows were in the pasture started like a stampede following it, and through the neighbor's fence, and ended up in the neighbor's grain yard. And they didn't like that. Jim spent the summer living off the land by Nordegg, catching and sold trout to the local restaurant for income. And then all through his life, Nordegg and Shunda Creek seemed to be a favorite retreat for him. He went there often just to camp out or to go fishing. It just seemed like a favorite throughout the rest of his life. There's one time John set him up on a double date. There was Jim and John, and I'm getting the looks. Roberta and another girl. And anyhow, they had a great date. And afterward, Roberta's still a little upset when he saw the eyes she gives you. Jim told John, it's like, well, at least he gave you the good-looking one. Jim became a carpenter. He moved to Medicine Hat. There he met Sandy, who became his wife and mother to Christopher and Bradley. The wedding was at a courthouse. I think the courthouse here in Medicine Hat, if I remember right. In Edmonton. Okay, he got married at a courthouse, and then the reception was later. When he was at the reception, though, there's a story. He got there early. His wife was still getting dressed, and they were coming separately to the reception. But he got there quite early, and there was a girl that was one of his wife's friends needed help moving a couch. He thought, I got plenty of time still, so it's like, well, let's go move the couch. So he didn't think much of it. He drove with her over to get the couch and move it, or to move the couch. What he didn't realize, as soon as he parked his car and went inside, do you remember when they used to tie the cans underneath the car and put the just married? They stuck that on his car and the just married sign and the cans. So he went with this other girl to move the couch. He's got the just married sign and the cans at his reception. Let's see. He moved his young family back to Drayton Valley. They lived here for about 5 or 6 years. Unfortunately, his love of drinking seemed to take its toll on his family life. He was divorced about 6 or 7 years later. He liked fast cars, bikes, snow machines. He bought a 440 TNT Silver Bullet Skidoo when he was in high school. He bought a 650 Kawasaki KZ 650 motorbike. That's the light, fast kind. Nowadays we call those crotch rockets, but back then it was just a real fast, cool motorbike. He also had a nice horse that he kept on a farm by Drayton. He became an accomplished carpenter. He had started a new company just as a laborer. In a couple of days, he'd be foreman. In a week, he'd be like looking after several crews. It would all be great till he got all cut up on his bills, had a little extra money to drink, and then he wouldn't show up again until the money was all gone. He built a basement for John and Roberta. He did the basement for Don and Bernie. He remodeled our closet for me and Rose. So all of us thought that he must have done okay work. He was a master carpenter and really good at cement work when he wasn't drinking. His carpentry and salesmanship allowed him to start a few different companies. He'd write out a business plan, advertise for a partner with startup money. He seemed to quite quickly find the right guy. Then he would come home with a new truck, new tools, new company, and all would work good. Eventually, though, you'd get some extra money and then disappear to the bars till all the money was gone. When you watch him work, you'd always tell how hard he's concentrating because he'd always have his tongue. And his tongue and his hands just moved together. So if you saw his tongue going, he was doing really good work. That was one neat thing. He liked nice things, and Roberta tells by the time he came to visit, he was wearing a new blue shirt, and it was a special shirt. It was dry clean only, and not only the regular dry clean, it needed to be dry cleaned some special way, but this shirt. And so he was sitting when Kimberly and Daniel were both small, and he was sitting next to, Karina. Kimberly. Okay, yeah, Kimberly and Daniel. He was sitting next to him, and every time that they were eating spaghetti, and every time that Kim would move towards him, he'd bolt out of there. He wasn't letting that kid get spaghetti all over his nice new shirt. Let's see, a couple of years ago, my son was out of the country for Christmas, and so as a family, we decided to serve the community Christmas dinner. It was really nice. Jim showed up. We got to spend Christmas dinner with him that year. So that was a nice treasure for us to spend some time with him at Christmas dinner. For the last few years of Jim's life, his main job was collecting bottles. Many will remember seeing him and his bike, the one with the yellow milk crates on the back, all around town. And he'd pick bottles. He'd always think of others as he went around. And if he found a treasure, he'd phone you up. And if there's something that he thought he could use. I know he called me for about, I'm just thinking the last few things, a drum set, a computer, a fax machine, a copier. If he found something that he thought you'd use, he'd phone you and see if you could use this because, you might as well. A couple weeks ago, he found a Hip Street MP3 player. It said Hip Street on it. And he immediately thought of Dominique because he knows she likes hip-hop dancing and like Hip Street, hip-hop. This would be perfect for her. So he dropped it off. I don't know if there's any music on it. I have no idea, but he was he's always thinking about others when he found stuff like that. He also thought about others just this last Christmas at the Church of God Christmas banquet at the Legion. Mrs. Moran was talking to him, mentioned how there was no tea. There's only coffee that she doesn't drink, and juice that's too sugary for her to drink. She didn't think much else of it, but Jim quietly slipped out into the cold, snowy night, walked to 7-Eleven, returned with a large tea for her. So he was carrying. There's a song we're going to play here soon, and Jim asked if he'd play this song at his funeral. It's called Choices by George Jones. So I'm going to read you the lyrics, and we'll hear the song eventually. Before the service, you'll hear the lyrics. And Jim asked for this, so it's a little bit of the way that he's thinking. I've had choices since the day that I was born. There were voices that told me right from wrong. If I had listened, no, I wouldn't be here today, living and dying by the choices I've made. I was tempted at an early age. I found I liked drinking, and I never turned it down. There were loved ones, but I turned them all away. Now I'm living and dying by the choices I've made. I've had choices since the day I was born. There were voices that told me right from wrong. If I had listened, I wouldn't be here today, living and dying with the choices I've made. I guess I'm paying for the things I've done. If I could go back, oh Lord knows I'd run. But I'm still losing this game of life I play. Losing and dying with the choices I've made. Living and dying with the choices that I've made. So, you know, it's this mixed emotion, with mixed emotions that I say a final goodbye to Jim. Sometimes he's a real pain to deal with when he phone you up drunk in the middle of the night and wants something. But sometimes he is a talented musician or the master carpenter, sometimes a caring and thoughtful brother. But God put him into our lives. God put him into my life, into each of our lives for a reason. And so we might not know what that reason is, and we might, but he's been a part of all of us. Last week, Jim was taken to the Drayton Hospital. They found some kind of infection in his lungs, filled with fluid. So on Monday, they took him in. They couldn't diagnose him. They sent him by stars to Edmonton. There, they put him on life support, tried to drain his lungs. His kidney shut down. Dialysis was attempted, but not successful. The doctor said it's nothing related to drinking, but some kind of serious infection that he had. Go figure. Jim passed away then Tuesday, February 10th, at 57 years old, in Greyman's Hospital, just a few miles from where he was born 57 years earlier.